21 million Malaysians are set to go to the polls next month, with officials targeting a turnout of over 70%. Here's what you need to know about Malaysia's 15th general election. Nomination Day on Saturday, November 5th, marks the start of the two-week campaigning period. Polling day on Saturday, November 19th, will see Malaysians choosing a new government, with all 222 parliamentary seats up for grabs. At the same time, three states, Pahang, Perlis and Perak, will hold legislative elections. There are three main coalitions vying to form the next government. The long-ruling Barisan Nasional Alliance, led by current Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob, BN, suffered a shock defeat 4 years ago. The Perikatan Nasional Coalition, led by former PM Muhyiddin Yassin, and Pakatan Harapan, which won in 2018 but lost power 2 years later due to infighting. Anwar Ibrahim currently leads the alliance. Joining us now with more is Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the Malaysia Studies Programme at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute, Dr. Francis Hutchinson. Welcome to the show, Doctor. What are the key issues for voters, you think, and how will the parties use them to their advantage?
Sure. So I would say three main issues. So the first one is the economy. So of course, we know that the economy is just coming out of the pandemic. And so at this point in time, people have low levels of savings. Also, you had a lot of people tapping into their retirement accounts to access money. And then we also have, of course, because of the war in Ukraine and supply chains, the cost of living increasing very quickly. So as with everywhere, we have steep price rises and salaries are not really keeping up. So the immediate concerns of everyday living are paramount, and here we can expect Barisan Nasional to really kind of play to this. So they did just release a budget very recently, just before Parliament was dissolved, and the idea was to give people kind of a taster of what could happen if they are voted back in. And of course, it was a generous budget with lots and lots of side payments and welfare payments. The second one has to do with governance. And here this is very much about, the integrity of Malaysia's institutions. So that recently former Prime Minister Najib Razak was sentenced to jail after a very, very lengthy and thorough court proceeding that actually went through all layers of the judicial system. And for many people, this is seen to be a very, very important signal that the country is back on track and is seeking to revamp its institutions. But of course, we do have people in Barisan Nasional clamoring for the former Prime Minister to be pardoned. We also have the UMNO Party President, Zahid Hamidi, who is himself facing charges for corruption. And so this has many people in Pakatan Harapan, as well as Perikatan Nasional, kind of very much focusing on this and trying to portray themselves as coalitions that are not associated with corruption. And then the last issue is, of course, the timing of the election. Malaysia has a lot of flooding at the end of the year. And really, the argument is why, if there's almost a year that one could wait before going to elections, if Parliament was dissolved mid-July and then you have 60 days before the maximum time is up, this would take us into mid-September. So why now at this point in time, when we have this issue of flooding, we have issues of personal safety, and then of course there is the issue that UMNO Party President Zahid Hamidi is awaiting the final verdict of one of his trials for corruption, which is ongoing at this point in time. And if national elections are held, if he's convicted, so they're held afterwards, he is not able to stand or run for office.
I want to talk about the last point that you brought out, the third issue, that is on the issue of flooding. It has caused much controversy. Doctor, how much of an impact will this issue have on the election?
So historically, the government has refrained from holding elections in the later part of the year. So when we look at all the parliamentary elections, only 2 have been held in either October or November. And usually the preferred period is from March until August because of this reason. And if we look to early this year, in January, we had widespread flooding in no less than 7 states. So the potential for disruption is, of course, very, very important. The thing is, though, that Barisan Nasional has a very, very important advantage, and that is that they have a motivated core of supporters that will turn up to vote come rain or come shine. So they have very good grassroots networks that really go into communities. They have election workers that will have buses and long boats and all sorts of things to ferry people to actually turn up to vote. Whereas particularly Pakatan Harapan is much more conceptual and relies on people, particularly in urban areas, turning up themselves to vote. So if we have a context where there's, a fair amount of rain, it's disruptive, then actually this would play to Barisan Nasional's advantage. The caveat, though, is if there is a loss of life. And let's say, we know that the elections will be held on the 19th of November, which is quite into November, quite into the monsoon season. So if there is a loss of life in the run-up to the election, then this actually could very much cause blowback against Barisan Nasional.
Dr., 222 seats are up for grabs. Just to round up our discussion today, which are the main battleground states that you'll be watching for this general election?
So the first area or first state I would look at is actually Kedah. So Kedah is interesting because it is traditionally a state where you have Barisan Nasional competing with PAS. And both of these coalitions actually have quite good grassroots networks in this state. And, the control of the state has gone back and forth. In addition, it is also the home state of former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, and we can expect both him as well as his son Mukris to run again. And you have some presence of Pejuang there. So it will be interesting to see who takes the state and how well Pejuang does. If it doesn't really do very well, then I think this would be the beginning of the end for that party. The second state I would look at would be Perak. So Perak is also quite volatile. It's not like a heartland state that has always been either, Barisan Nasional or Pakatan Harapan. It's gone back and forth in 2008 and 2018. And if you look at the state government there now, you actually have three very clear blocks. So Barisan Nasional, you also have Pakatan Harapan, and then in the middle, you have Perikatan Nasional. So going forward, this would kind of be like a microcosm of Malaysia as a whole, where you see these 3 states competing against each other. And then lastly, I think Johor is interesting because in 2020, it very much illustrates what we talked about, that Barisan is very disciplined, can rely on a solid core of voters. So it did very well, but it only really did very well because everyone else did very badly. So, it was just coming out of the pandemic. You also didn't have a lot of movement across the border, so you couldn't have outstation people from Singapore showing up to vote. So this time around, if we can see a level of mobilization from Pakatan Harapan, I think that this would also be quite an interesting fight in parliamentary terms. Then the last part of your question is, how do we see Sabah and Sarawak? So usually what will happen is that you've got lots and lots of competition on the peninsula, and then you've got one coalition that's got a solid core of seats, and then it approaches the parties in Sabah and Sarawak to top up and make a solid parliamentary majority. And in this context, Sabah and Sarawak can actually ask for quite a lot of things when it comes to development spending as well as seats in cabinet. So this will be the second part of that dynamic.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified of new videos.